Everyone talks about grammar and vocabulary, but the actual hardest part of learning Spanish is something that most people don't even talk about. If you don't know me, my name is Hamid, I'm 15 years old, and I became a polyglot at 13 after getting fluent in Spanish, which was my fourth language. And I spent most of the time studying in the summer of 2022, and I spent around 5 days of straight studying, so 120 hours dispersed throughout a few months. Here's how I sounded before the summer of 2022.
Hola, estoy comiendo comida. Voy a mejorar mi español.
Y en este video voy a hablar de lo que a mí me parece muy difícil en el aprendizaje del español. Y eso es algo que no veo muchas personas hablar de esta cosa que voy a hablar en este video. Before the summer of 2022, I did a lot of research on different apps and different methods to learn Spanish. I went through Duolingo, memorized Babbel, all the different apps. And I did my research on YouTube like any 13-year-old would, or I was 12, almost 13. But eventually I found two YouTubers. The first YouTuber's name was Xiaoma, and he's like this white guy that speaks Chinese, and he just goes around New York speaking Chinese, and like, that's pretty much his entire channel. And then we have Language Lords, who just made a few videos about how he got fluent in French, Spanish, and then also later on Italian. And so I watched both of these videos, and I found like a pattern. And the basic pattern was essentially speaking with natives, having conversations with natives. And that makes total sense because that is the goal, right? The goal is to be able to have conversations with native speakers in Spanish. And so they would obviously practice that by speaking Spanish with natives. And that made complete sense. And also based on the exercises that they did, I realized that fluency just had two parts to it. And this is what I call the fluency equation. It is just speaking and understanding, because that's exactly what a conversation was. A conversation is I speak, you understand, you speak, I understand. And so that was the only part of the language one should study. And the best way to study that is by having conversations, because again, a conversation is by definition practicing your speaking and your understanding ability of Spanish, and not just regular Spanish, fast-paced, accent, extremely native sounding Spanish. And so there are many apps to do this, many ways, and as I was learning Spanish before the summer, I obviously found these apps, and the two main ones were Tandem and Hello Talk. So both of these are called language exchange apps. Language exchange apps are essentially like you talk to random people around the world and you find essentially a language exchange partner where they are native in the language that you want to learn and we're native in our own native language, and they want to learn our native language like English or whatever, and we want to learn Spanish. And so what happens if you connect with this person and then you just speak with them, and then you essentially do like 30 minutes English, 30 minutes Spanish, and just speaking. So it's essentially just an app for finding people to talk with in Spanish. And Tandem works the exact same. Both Tandem and the Hello Talk work the exact same in that way. So I went on Hello Talk, and I remember the first time I was on there, I just asked like tons of people. Then I had to like find different partners, and you have to like cold approach almost. So you slide into someone's DMs essentially, like, hey, do you want to be my language partner? And I actually found like one or two language partners, but I only gone on one call with a language partner. And anyways, that was like after the summer. Before the summer, what I like to do is I go on these like live chats on Hello Talk, which is essentially like this like chat room. You just join and then you can just speak with random people, and then you don't have to talk to them again. You just leave. And so that was a great way to start speaking Spanish with natives. Now, around the middle of the summer, I realized that I had to start speaking Spanish. At this point, I had gone through the grammar, and I took like the main idea and used two exercises, because the fluency equation is speaking multiplied by understanding. I had a speaking exercise and a listening exercise, or an understanding exercise. And so I started hyperfixating on those. And around the middle of the summer, so like July, late July maybe, I went on my first like actual voice call or conversation with a native. And it was so awkward. I was so nervous. I joined the call and I was just muted for a long time. And they asked me like, oh, how long have you been learning? And I said, oh, I've been learning a few months now. And then actually a lot of time they were impressed, which meant something good, of course. Anyways, but then I just stood silent for the rest of the call. I didn't say a single word. I was just, I don't know, it was really awkward. Obviously, it's the first time you join anything, so it was really like, just you were listening to them. Anyways, and then I started going on more and more calls. And eventually, I also matched with this like Colombian, and I started speaking with him. And I started writing messages and just like texting, but also sending voice messages, all in Spanish, just so I could practice. And then I continued trying to speak with natives. And honestly, it was extremely hard to do it. Not only for the social and awkward aspect, because you're joining a Spanish room, but then you barely speak any Spanish. So it's like, do you know what I mean? But then also, like, the thing about what you should talk about. Like, oh, what do you do in your free time? You don't want a boring call either. So anyway, I did a few calls here and there, and I remember eventually I went on like a 1 hour call with a native speaker on the live chat thing, and we just spoke for like an hour long, and it was a full-blown conversation, fluent, just being able to say exactly what I wanted to say. And by the end of the call, I just achieved my goal. I just had an hour-long conversation with a native speaker purely in Spanish. That means I'm conversationally fluent. And so after that point, after summer, I didn't really study a lot of Spanish, but I was able to speak with natives now. I had the ability to actually speak. And that's when I started doing Hello Talk way more. And that's when I went on my first actual language exchange call with this one Colombian. And that sort of helped a little. This time I was just trying to maintain my Spanish because I really didn't care for being like really, really good. I just want to be able to have conversations. And so what I tried to do is on the way back from school, I would try speaking. And just on the road, essentially, when I had free time, I would try speaking. And that sort of worked a little. I had some good conversations with some people. But in this break, I'm trying to reach a native level fluency. You've probably seen this series on my channel, maybe, of me, trying to get to native fluency. And what I've started to realize is that finding natives to speak with, especially if you don't live in like a Spanish-speaking country, is actually the hardest part of learning Spanish. Genuinely. Because the best exercise to get fluent in Spanish is to have conversations, because that's the goal, to be able to converse with natives. And so the best exercise is also the hardest thing to do, because grammar, it's like, okay, you can spam it in your free time, right? I can go through all the grammar, I can go through like the language transfer course, right? For a speaking exercise, I can speak Spanish just in my free time. I call it narrate, elaborate, contemplate. That is the framework for speaking. And then my listening or understanding exercise, which is transcript training. I can do all of those irrelevant to what time it is or, where I am. I can do all of those pretty much anywhere, anytime, whenever I want. Speaking with natives, if you're doing an exchange call, you have to have a scheduled time for it. And then you have to make sure like no one's going to interrupt you in the background, which obviously when you're 13, there's always people walking into your room and you get like babies crying in the back, like stuff like that, right? But then it's more so a social thing. Like the apps exist, but it is so hard to like get into a conversation in Spanish. And it's even more awkward when you don't know how to say something. That sort of social barrier is honestly the hardest like barrier in Spanish, because all the other aspects of Spanish you can just develop anytime, anywhere. For me, especially since I live in Sweden, it is so annoying because every single Spanish speaker, every time it's late for me, it is like the day for them. And anytime it is early for me, it is late for them. So it's even harder to find like a good time to speak with natives. Now here are some tips I have for doing this, because even though it can seem very intimidating and very hard to do this in the beginning, it is one of the best things ever. I'm probably just unfortunate because I don't know many like Spanish speakers myself. And I also just live in Sweden, which means that the time is all messed up. But let me give you 5 tips for being able to have conversations with natives and how to go about it. So we already know use Hello Talk to speak with natives, or in tandem, whichever one. The first tip is just stay calm. Don't be nervous that you're going to mess up or something. It can be embarrassing, like if you say something wrong or something like that. But I find that the best way to do it is just to laugh it off or to make a joke about it. Especially if they speak extremely quickly, okay? If someone says something very quickly, what I'll do to say that I didn't understand them is make a joke. Exactly what they said, I'll mock it. And then I'll say like, alright, and I'll be like, amigo, hablas muy rápido. Like something like that, like, can you please speak slowly? Or like, bro, you're speaking way too quickly. Slow it down. Just having a positive mood and not being so like nervous. And that goes into the rest, which is to not be so like quiet and timid. When I first started, I realized was everyone else in the call, like in the Spanish call, when you're trying to speak Spanish to people, everyone else is just as nervous as you. So it's like you kind of have to be the leader in the sense that you need to lead the conversation. Usually it is super nice when there's like an actual extrovert there who can actually lead the conversation. And usually when it happens it's good. But most of the times you have to be that extrovert that continues the conversation. And all that means is just like be social, speak. But if there's a little pause, it's not the end of the world. It's a tiny silence. You can ask more questions like, oh, where are you from? Or what's your favorite part of your culture? Or what's your favorite food and why? Or like, it doesn't have to be, those are probably kind of boring. It's better if you go in there with like a joking tone. It is better to be joking because most people just like social people more. Most people like the guy who speaks kind of loudly and makes jokes all the time, right? Rather than the guy who's just timid and is muted himself. You're never going to talk to these people. Like, who cares if you embarrass yourself? You just leave the call or you just ignore their messages. right? And if you don't understand what someone says, it's not weird to say, can you repeat that, or can you write it down, text it to me. Because like a lot of times they would say something super quickly and I'd be like, what the hell did he say? And then he went through slowly, and even if I still didn't understand what that meant, I would ask him to describe it in Spanish, or if he knew English, I'd ask him in English. Or I'll just tell him to type it, and if I still don't know what he said, then I'll just copy paste it to an app called DeepL, which is a translator app, just to translate it. And it is that simple. And also, when you don't know how to say something, that's what I like to do. When I didn't know how to say something in Spanish in a conversation, I would open DeepL, which is a translator. It is kind of handy to know how to say like espera, or like, wait a little, can you wait? I'm translating this. Just to know sort of like the words of how to say certain phrases that give you a little more time to be able to think and stuff like that. But more than that, it is literally just to start speaking. Honestly, I find the hardest part in language learning, it is to find time to use the language and actually use it in terms of conversations. The main thing is that like Spanish is essentially just grammar and vocab, right? And so like there's no real exercise to be able to just talk about whatever and to actually be able to like understand what you're saying and speak it. It is just to do it. There's nothing to it. Go talk to that native. It's literally like that. And that makes it so much more inconsistent, especially for me. I can never actually have a consistent time where I'll consistently speak with natives. And that sucks because that is literally the best way to learn Spanish. It is to speak with natives. I hope this video helped you, bro. If you want one-on-one coaching with me, where I'll teach you Spanish the way I did, then check the description. And I hope this video helped you, bro, and stay humble.